Hi, folks. It's Steve. I am here today with Christine Padovan. Christine, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm so happy that you chose to join us today. Um, I am considering you a freedom fighter,
Mhm.
and that's why we're having a discussion today. And I'd like to know what does freedom mean to you, and why is it so important that you'd like to fight for it?
Freedom means to me where you live in a country that doesn't take away your human rights to having a safe home, having, food and water and the basic necessities to survive. And I could obviously in this day and age we need electricity, we need some sort of heat or cooling to keep us going, and not impeding us in terms of our race, religion, anything like that, in terms of where we work, where we live. Um, and freedom to choose, do we go to a doctor, do we have to have health insurance and things like that, the freedom to live your life as a sovereign human being. That's what and I feel that also applies to animals, that we should be more respectful of that too. So freedom not only applies to the humans but animal and plant life too.
For sure. Okay. So, are you concerned today? You're certainly taking a stand? Why at this time in your life are you taking a stand for freedom?
Well, you I know I'm probably not the first one, obviously, to say this. As you know, Steve, there is so much that's happened, especially in the last, I would say, 10 years or so. I would say probably even going back to 2008, since President Obama was president, that there's been a lot of changes in the United States. And of course, not just here, obviously in other countries as well, because freedom doesn't just apply to the United States. There's issues with government in Canada and other countries as well. So it's especially for what I went through in the last 10 years, um, which made it very key to me that I could not just be a small player when it came to what I went through and what others are going through. It was evident the system was completely breaking down, where government was getting more control over situations. There's less law enforcement. There is more. We're seeing more corruption, less justice, and people are upset to see that. And we're realizing that we have to be the light. We have to be the change when authority and law breaks down. We have to step up to the plate and make those changes.
Okay. Have you already always been a person who basically says, "I'll be the answer," or is this new to you?
No, I guess I've always been that way, probably since I was a little kid, with when in my local neighborhood there was a private street that was my street that I went up to walk to get to the bus stop every day. And there was like some trash piling up. People were being disrespectful and throwing out cigarette butts or little things here and there outside their car window. And I'd go around the neighborhood with a paper bag and I'd be picking it up and I'd knock on the doors and say, hey, do you mind if I help clean up your lawn? And can you help support me as I do this? And, some people would, they'd give me a little bit. And it wasn't so much I wanted to do it for the money, but I was like, man, this looks terrible. Something's got to be done. Same thing for when an animal would get lost or a pet got lost, finding their owner. The Leukemia Association yearly did a fundraiser, and they would send those little boxes to people that would want to go around the neighborhood and solicit for their fundraiser. I did that for like 3 years in a row. So scams that then my mom and other people went through years later, I would get media attention on it. I would find out who that person was and work with police. So I guess that's always been in me. So yeah, I guess it's not something new.
Has it created problems for you being like this?
I don't think so. I don't think necessarily, except for what we're going to relate to what happened to me in the last 10 years, was a major issue, especially because of how much law enforcement and things are going on in the world has changed. But in early years, it definitely was never an issue.
All right, let's talk about the last 10 years. So, how did life change for you that all of a sudden Christine being Christine had a
Mm.
downside?
I moved to California in December of 2010, and I was had started a voice career. I started getting into the entertainment world, doing some small independent films, commercials, and stuff, and then kind of just by chance segued into voiceover. And I was here in Florida at the time and said, okay, do I go back to the New York, New Jersey area where there's just a lot of voiceover going on there, or towards Los Angeles and California? And I said, prior to the winters in New York, I'm going to head to California. So, and there's lovely colleagues in LA, but that's not really my cup of tea growing up in a small town. So I lived closer to San Francisco and just would commute to LA if I needed to. And most voiceover now, you can just do things remotely. So it's not like you have to physically be in that major city to audition for them. So in that time frame, like a couple of years later, I met my now ex-husband and fell in love. He wanted me to move in, and that's when things changed. Not because of really him, but because of who his son met at his parole office. This young woman who had a long criminal history since she was a teenager. And I have a degree in psychology. I'm very intuitive. And I sensed right away that she was very problematic. She wasn't very social with family members. She always was very suspicious and just very distrusting. And I just kind of sensed right away that she was probably going to be a problem. And I was correct. When he said, oh, he was encouraging them to go live together, even though they'd only known each other a month. I said, don't do that. This girl is bad news. I literally just said that out of my mouth. This girl is bad news. And I said, let them get to know each other, blah, blah, blah. And if that had done that, it would have sorted itself out. He would have seen what she was. And so it's going to be a long story, so I have to kind of shorten it. Things started happening where she would, bake gifts of food, and she'd kind of come over with them. And I kind of noticed when other things started occurring, when she would get upset with us for not giving her a certain gift or doing things for her a certain way. I said, we need to not eat her gifts of food. I really sensed that because of her vengeful behavior, that she would also poison the food. That's the type of person she was. And he didn't want to believe that. I guess there's people out there, and people like this, Steve, they don't want to think that bad things can happen to them if they have a kind of a pretty normal life. They know person in a family can be problematic, but they want to just kind of sweep things under the rug. And I'm not like that. I see a problem. I know we have to face it. It's not going to go away if you don't address it. So things did start happening health-wise. And I had, there was key events that happened that were tied back to her. And so I said, okay, doctors weren't believing us because they saw the symptoms, but their tests would not show anything, just like regular LabCorp Quest diagnostic tests wouldn't show when I asked for testing for arsenic and other, similar elements. But everything seemed too perfect, seemed too, you know what I'm saying? So I sent stuff out for forensic testing. knowing this was this is possible criminal thing going on, you want something that's admissible in court, and forensic tests are that. And then it was just boom, everything was there in a forensic test, soup to nuts of what we were being hit with, and then having to deal with that. And here was the problem, because now we're in between when this started to occur around 2015, between late 2013 to mid 2016, things changed drastically in California, especially in terms of what the governor there was doing and law enforcement. And it's very difficult, even if you go to police with proof of poisoning, they need to see for themselves with some sort of sample, and then sending it to their own third-party testing. And when you deal with small town police that are not used to this, they sent the sample to the Department of Health and it came back blank, because they didn't use forensics, and they thought I was lying. And so, the DA didn't want to push it forward. There was everything in the way, everything that I did. 5 cases were actually opened up through 2019 in different towns where she would move, because she knew I was figuring things out. And then once a corrupt detective told her my name and told her, things then got really bad, because then here I am in a position different than years before, now being attacked by suspects that the police weren't protecting me from. And even going after my family in like my elderly mom in New Jersey and my friend in Illinois. This is how vengeful she and her associates got with me, because they knew I had evidence. They knew I could put her away and put everyone associated with her away. So it turned into like a spy thriller for me. That's kind of how my life has been for the last 10 years.
It's a remarkable story, and I'm very sorry that you went through that. And you cross paths too closely with a crazed, psychotic, dangerous person. And I appreciate how you're describing this as something that a lot of people can't relate to if they haven't come across such a drastic and extreme threat in their lives. It's very hard for them to digest and react to. But I will say this, and I will tell you how it relates to me with the topic that we're discussing, which is protecting freedom from tyranny. I have a family, in my family, of Holocaust survivors. I know many personally, and there are horrible tales of treachery and deviousness and betrayal, turning in your family. George Soros, one of the evil masterminds of our time, is a Jew who turned against the Jews.
Mm.
So I will tell you that my frame of reference, yeah, bad things like this happen.
Yes.
So having said this, now today you have persevered, and you're fighting a fight. Can you just you're knowledgeable about psychology? Are you aware of somehow channeling um, the angst and the trauma into a productive effort? Is your freedom work a channel for you to transcend this whole nightmare?
Oh, absolutely. Because I also have, from when I was a child, I've always been into also health and nutrition and fitness. I've been a lifelong athlete since I could walk. So I was always very cognizant of when a symptom occurs, there's a root cause for it. So, and having known and understood what was going on with her, the symptoms correlated to something severe, such as poisoning occurring. And so what I did as this was occurring, to us, I And what was interesting is most of the stuff that happened because I got so little in me because I was avoiding her, and then her knowing, I said, we need to detoxify. And doctors were not understanding this because that was the other thing, Steve. People think doctors know everything. Like a general practitioner knows everything about every little aspect of the human body. When it comes to toxicology, if they have one semester about toxins and nutrition, I even spoke to a licensed dietitian, and she said if they had one course in any of that, that's a lot. Because she would have arguments with doctors in the hospital of what the patient should be eating based on their health condition. The doctors would argue with her. So I'm not afraid to argue with doctors, especially when I show them my forensics and I know what needs to be done for the body to heal. But they're more apt to say, okay, well, there's this symptom. I'm going to throw prednisone, a steroid at it, because that's what they know. And I knew that was not the solution. That's a Band-Aid. And that also actually, when you have especially heavy metal poisoning in you, it actually makes the symptoms worse. The suspects know this, being medically and pharmaceutically trained. So I said, this is a major, major issue. So I encouraged and had to prove to my ex, and of course it was easy just to, get my mom detoxified, but it's very difficult to convince somebody like my friend Kathy that I had tested and she had active thallium and other things in her to get away from their pharmacy, change pharmacies, change doctors. Very difficult because the person says, oh, the doctor is so nice. And I'm like, they're not. I said, you don't know how much money they are being paid to smile at you and then give you this poison. I said, people have debt. You don't know. You don't know what someone has going on with them. And I've had arguments with employers about that too. When someone was misusing credit cards and, oh, I know this person for 3 years. No, you work with them, but you don't really know what's going on with what their background or anything. So I try to educate people. And I said, this is going to be a big, big thing, especially the last time they tried to really bump me off. And I had over 600 micrograms per liter of arsenic that they threw at me through my ex, who they were slow poisoning again to convince him to bump me off. And that's the biggest problem, Steve, is that it confuses people. You can easily manipulate the person's thoughts when they're that poisoned. They're not thinking straight. So imagine the implications for the government with what's going on with these flu and COVID shots that have been major issues for the last couple of years, with manipulating people's mental status, making them do more gun violence, to kill more people off, to reduce the population. I said, this is major. I can't sit back. Of course, I had to go get myself safe. I had to, of course, detoxify from that last thing, get out of California and get into a state that has some semblance of law, right? And get myself in a safe position, not tell my ex that I was going to leave him so I could stay safe. Because they took the life of my cat too. Anyway, it's like a spy movie. I have to tell you, one of these days I have to write a book. They keep telling me to tell this amazing story. But right now, what's more important to me is saving lives, educating the public on what chronic toxicity does to the body and how you have to be aware of suspicious, envious colleagues, jealous of your position at work, spouses or boyfriend, girlfriends that don't want to have a major breakup or spend money for a divorce. This happens frequently, and I can even cite examples of it. It's been a dentist in the news on CNN in April, poisoning his wife with arsenic. 3 times to the hospital, Steve. No one, no one tested her for toxins. And that could have saved her life. If they forensically tested her at one of those hospital visits, make this a standard test, which is what I'm trying to do. That's another thing, is change the medical industry in uncovering root cause. How many lives would be saved from intentional, accidental, or environmental poisoning cases? So I said, no, and from the victims I had interviewed from my toxicologist who had similar stories to mine, with somebody in the family poisoning neighbors, poisoning colleagues to get into a company, or get higher up in a company. This is not something isolated just to me. It happens quite frequently. But even just the accidental environmental stuff that's going on, I said, these people are traumatized. I don't care. I said, I have to do what I have to do because that's who I am. I can't sit back and let this happen to the world. I have to tell my story. I have to relate to people what they need to do to reverse symptoms, to how to detoxify safely, and how to get properly tested, because I have to convince people your doctor doesn't have that answer, and most doctors would rather keep you sick, as you know, Steve, unfortunately, and make money off of you than get you well.
I tell you, I think this is your time, and I think what's interesting is that you have a contribution to make in two arenas. One is your expertise, your technical expertise in dealing with the specific toxicity problems that you've had to learn firsthand
Mm-hmm.
because it affected you. You have personally experienced these problems. So for sure, it's imperative that you share your knowledge because these shots are toxic. Flu
Mm-hmm.
vaccines are toxic.
Yep.
And a lot of what doctors prescribe are toxic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I also see your contribution as being on a larger level. I mean, you refer to the brainwashing and the psyops. I mean, the people that try to poison other people and get people to harm other people are
Right.
conducting a psyops of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty darn clear that that's what's being conducted against our citizenry of the world on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you find out, government knows the shots are bad, they're not effective, they hurt you,
Mm-hmm.
they make you sterile, and they kill pregnancies and this and that. Like, but keep taking them, and make sure you tell your friends to do the same. What happened to you, horribly in a family setting, is being taken place on a global setting by people who are with intent to harm. So, and so as crazy and horrible as your personal story is, it's like a symbolic of what's happening on a larger level. So, for whatever reason, this crazy story is really, really pertinent today. And I think you've done a real commendable job of drawing out lessons to be learned. Good for you. Um, this is your time. Do you feel called upon? Can you
Oh,
can you use those
absolutely.
words?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a very spiritual person, and that has also grown, those abilities too, especially over the last, also, since 2008 or so. It's grown tremendously, especially how I was figuring out what she was doing, and my abilities were just spot on all the time. And then, of course, I'm a geek with science stuff too. I'm a technical person, been into computers since college, so I have that to using technology and the psychology and spiritual side to bring it all together. And that's so key now, Steve, is people need to say, I can do something. If something bad is happening to me, whether it's in their work situation, whether it's in their family or friend circle, that they can not have to they don't have to feel powerless, that they can't do something. And that's what I try to also let people know, is that you're not alone in this fight that what's happening here. So yes, it definitely happened for a reason. I felt, okay, there's always a reason for why something like this happens to you. And I said, okay, I can't play small. I can't just be a small business owner with just voiceover and maybe a little bit of some healthcare consulting on the side. This has to be global. This has to be a global effort. Every country has to have this information. Every person needs to be taught this information of how they need to be technically their own doctor. In this point in time, we have to be our own healers. And until we turn things around, this is good news, Steve. There are more doctors that are kind of thinking to themselves, well, we probably should be more preventative. We should be more, and there are more starting to do that, but it's going to be a while. I think it's still going to be some time before I can get the whole medical establishment and even law enforcement to say forensic toxicity testing needs to be a standard when someone enters the hospital, not just a standard blood test to see what your red or white cell count is. You need to be looking at the whole picture.
That would be a marvelous legacy. So speaking of legacy, let's wrap up with this. This is going to be a multi-generational effort. It's regardless of who gets elected, regardless, I've often said, we can take all the bad guys, round them up, put them away as they should be, but there's still
Mm,
so many layers of management, of professionals and business and government people who already drank the Kool-Aid. It's
mm.
going to take a long time to get them to stop doing the damage and fix the damage. So having said that,
Mm-hmm.
tell me what your legacy is. Tell me how you want people 50 years from now, 60 and 80 years from now to remember you.
I think I want them to remember me as someone similar to, and you have to forgive me, Steve, I didn't look up his name before we spoke, similar to Linus Paul, we'll say Dr. Linus Pauling with vitamin C, and having to convince people that vitamin C was such a critical antioxidant to take to keep the body healthy. And how everyone, when you hear his name, that's what you remember. The professor that knew, it must be over 40 years ago now, that knew that keeping lead in gasoline, remember leaded gasoline? I remember that as a kid, leaded gasoline, we're old enough to remember that, knew that keeping lead in the gasoline was going to just put such toxicity in the air if they didn't remove the lead. And it took him, I think, 20 years, with constantly writing articles and constantly going in front of Congress to get those laws passed. So what I feel I want people to know in the next, whatever, 20, 30 years, however long this takes, is that they'll remember how toxins, whether from whatever source it is, and it actually can be, we talk about toxicity, can also be on a mental level too, emotional, mental toxicity as well, not just the physical. They're going to say, okay, she's the one that really brought to life how toxins create artificial allergies and illnesses in over 80%, and how we can keep those away from us and stay healthy and keep our animals and plant life healthy as well. So that's really what I want people to take away.
That would be a wonderful legacy, and I have every confidence that you'll get there. Um, Christine, you've been very kind with not just your time, but with yourself and sharing your story. And it is such a story of perseverance. And I thank you for that. And um, I'm grateful because when a lot of people hear the story, um, and they hear about how somebody who suffered, has been suffering a continuous personal persecution,
Mm-hmm.
is rising above that and trying to save the world from persecution in terms of medical tyranny, medical misinformation, medical brainwashing.
Yeah.
um, they will admire you as I do right now. So thank you so much, and I wish you every success in the world.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.